freedom is never more than one generation away from extinction. We didn't pass it on to our children in the bloodstream. The only way they can inherit the freedom we have known is if we fight for it, protect it, defend it, and then hand it to them with the well-taught lessons of how they in their lifetime must do the same. And if you and I don't do this, then you and I may well spend our sunset years telling our children and our children's children what it once was like in America when men were free.
Hey everybody, welcome to another episode of Gun Freedom Radio, where we engage, we educate, and we inform. We are brought to you by azfirearms.com, your nationwide hometown gun shop. I am one of your hosts, Cheryl Todd.
And I'm the other guy, Dan Todd. We're doing a series called Ameri-CAN, talking about the can-do spirit that is part of our American DNA.
Absolutely. Our lives have been completely upended with this whole coronavirus situation. And we've been hearing an awful lot about what we can't do and all the places that we can't go. But the guests and the experts that we are interviewing during this series are going to help us understand about all the things that we still can do, learn and grow, teach, train, connect, and expand our freedoms in ways that maybe we haven't even thought about before. Our guest today is Michael Peroutka. Michael is a Maryland lawyer and the founder of the Institute on the Constitution. Michael once held a position in the United States Department of Health and Human Services and was the Constitution Party candidate for president in 2004. He is also the co-host of the American View radio program. Welcome to the show, Michael. We are excited to have you on.
Well, thank you, Cheryl and Dan. It's a great privilege to be with you, and I appreciate your hospitality and all of your technology. I appreciate that as well.
Oh, my goodness. And it's ever changing. I mean, we're using Zoom because some people will watch us on YouTube or GunStreamer, and some people will just listen to the audio on our website. But Zoom itself has taken, huge leaps and bounds with the amount of people using their platform. And so if it's not like something in our board, like my headphones don't work, then it's something with Zoom or it's something with the internet connection. But we are plowing through. We are making
surely
this work.
It's something every day.
Yeah,
every day.
Well, it's a bit of a setback for me because they say I have a face for radio. I'm sure you've heard that before.
Well, I say that about my own self. So anyway, well, so Michael, you are currently teaching an online course in the U.S. Constitution. Tell us about that course and why, especially right now in U.S. history, we need such a study.
Well, thank you. Yeah, it's critical that we understand the rules. I mentioned earlier that my mentor, Mr. Howard Phillips, was a great friend of mine, and he used to say, "Thou shalt know the rules." And with respect to the Constitution of the United States, the Constitution of our state, personally, we have gone to sleep and drifted out to sea, away from our knowledge that we need to have. And it's very important. We've been doing this for about 22 years, Cheryl and Dan, this Institute on the Constitution, and we've been trying to get people to really to care about knowing how to hold their elected representatives accountable. And it's taken this kind of crisis right now for our phones to start ringing, and that's a blessing. Of course, it's a blessing that comes in the midst of a great problem and worrisome situation for our country. But with regard to the class, we developed years ago a course on a systematic way to study the United States Constitution and American history. And what we're trying to do in that course is to think like the founders thought. We're not trying to go back in time or turn back the clock, but we're trying to recover something that's lost in our understanding, in our speech, in our way of looking at government. And it's critical. What many people don't realize, and this would take maybe a whole show to delineate this by itself, but a revolution has occurred in America with respect to how we look at, how we view law, its source, its nature, etc. And we suffer because of that, because all attorneys now are taught in that kind of revolutionary way, not in the original way. So our approach is to try to think like the founders thought and recover their view of law and government, which was based on a biblical worldview, and which had standards. The Constitution was a fixed standard in their view, not a living Constitution, which is molded and shaped by the courts in an evolutionary process, which is what we're living in today. All of that has been kind of an underlying problem that has led to us not knowing what we need to know and doing what we need to do with respect to this current crisis.
That is so interesting. Now, that one distinction that you just made, a living document versus a fixed set of rules for this is how the government is supposed to work. These are the things the government is supposed to do, which therefore maybe there's a whole lot of things that it's trying to do that it wasn't designed to do. Right? That's an interesting thought. Go ahead with that.
Yes, well, in his farewell address, George Washington said that if we've not done the right job with the Constitution, and it needs changing, let's do it by the way that is prescribed. Let's do it by an amendment process. Let's not do it by fiat, because which is what we've come to do in America. The courts have we've kind of given over this lawmaking process to courts, which is absolutely wrong. But we suffer because of it, because they reinterpret things without any solid basis, but just based on the whims of their personal beliefs. And that's what we call this living Constitution. And my friend Franklin Sanders says that to say that the Constitution is living, of course, is to say that it's dead by means of being a fixed standard. If it's not a fixed standard, then it's dead in terms of its original usefulness. It's just given lip service now as the tool of this revolution. I mentioned the revolution, and if I could just give you just a little bit of background on that.
Yes,
when our founders went to school and studied law, when Patrick Henry studied law in Williamsburg under Peyton Randolph or George Wythe, their basis for understanding where law came from was the Bible. And that was their law book, and they looked to the Bible. They looked to the works of Blackstone, who was an English judge who was very influential on the founding fathers. And basically, Blackstone's to summarize it, he would say that municipal law, which is the law that men make, any man-made law, if it's not in harmony with God's law, then it's not law. So they would look back to the Bible and to Leviticus and Exodus and Deuteronomy, etc., to understand what the law was, its source and nature. Back in the 1880s at Harvard Law School, they basically jettisoned that under a man named Christopher Columbus Langdell, and under this Langdellian theory, now we look to judges, we look to the rulings in cases, and we find the source of law there. So instead of finding the source of law in God, as our founders did, now we find the source of law in man, and it has had tragic results.
Well, for sure, and we're seeing that play itself out
I hope
on
I'm
a
not
daily basis.
Too off track here, but it seems to me that we've got a difficult road ahead of us, because there's a lot of politicians right now that are using the Constitution as a way to control the people, and that's not what the Constitution was written to do.
No, the Constitution, and you're very right. Constitution they say is not a document that governs us. It's a document that governs those who govern us.
Right.
But it's supposed to limit their authority and specify the limits of their authority and power. And look, if you look at it this way, the job of an elected official is to keep his oath of office. In order to do that, he's got to know the law. He's got to know the Constitution, and theoretically, he's got to know the Bible. I know that sounds strange in a secular age to say that, but he's not qualified if he doesn't.
Mhm.
But the job of the rest of us is to hold him to his oath of office. And we can't do that unless we know the rules. We've got to know the Bible and the Constitution, because those are the standards by which we understand whether something is lawful or not. If you go back to the Declaration of Independence, our founders were complaining. About 2/3 of that document is a list of 27 grievances against the king and against Parliament. That's basically what that document is. And in certain cases, they said that they called things that Parliament was doing that they didn't have authority to do, they called that pretended legislation, which I think is a great term right out of our, and they call, if you violated those things, they called those pretended offenses. So they didn't call the Stamp Act, the Tea Act, the Townsend Acts that they were objecting to, they didn't call them law because they didn't think they were law. Their understanding of law was purer than ours is. We go, well, Obamacare is law because, or just as an example, or some gun control thing is law because some legislature spilled ink on a page and some executive signed it and some court said it was valid. That doesn't make it law. But unless we understand those fundamental principles, we are duped, and we say, oh, well, that's law because the legislature said so. No. It still needs to, in the American view of law and government, it still needs to meet those standards.
Well, Michael, you were saying that, the people need to understand the Constitution. Well, a lot of people haven't felt like they've been affected by the laws. They were okay with what's going on. Now with this new coronavirus, we're finding a lot of people going, wait a minute, now these are my rights you're taking away. And they're starting to wake up. So maybe you're right. Maybe we do have some kind of little revolution going on. Yeah.
Well, and I would call it I would call it a restoration. What we need, a revolution has happened. A restoration is needed.
Right.
Okay. We need to get back to a clear biblical and constitutional way of thinking. Let me just give you an example. In my state, one of the problems is people don't know the Constitution of their own state really at all. In my state, there are 2 law schools. I went to one of them about 100 years ago. But in both of those law schools, or I should say, neither of those law schools have a course in the Maryland Constitution, and yet everybody that graduates from there takes an oath to protect and defend it. And then they later on become judges, and they subvert it and pervert it because they've never actually studied it in any systematic way. Matter of fact, the only place I know that you can study the Maryland Constitution is an Institute on the Constitution. We have a course in that. And let me just, in our Article 44 of our Declaration of Rights, it says this. It says, the Constitution of the United States and of this state, meaning Maryland, apply as well in times of war as in times of peace, and no deviation therefrom or violation thereof under the plea of necessity or any other plea is valid. Now that couldn't be more on point.
Mm-hmm.
Our governor and the governor in many states have absolutely, under the plea of necessity, under this emergency plea, have suspended, if you will, our Constitution. Well, but the Constitution says directly that that's not valid. So we have, but the trouble is, the people don't know it, and we can't enforce what we don't know. We say that the Constitution is not it is a wonderful document, but it's not a self-enforcing document. Mm-hmm. The words are not going to jump off the page and enforce themselves. It takes the common citizenry to be there, to be its champion.
Well, Michael, I haven't read the Maryland law, but are you sure there's not a "I want to if I want" clause in there? That's what they do.
You've seen that meme that says it's the Constitutional Convention, and George Washington is looking at James Madison. He says, "No, none of this counts if somebody gets sick, right?" I mean, all of that is absolutely absurd. I think one message that I would like to just get out to people: all of these actions of these governors, all of them are lawless. Mm-hmm. They try to point to some emergency legislation that their state legislature has given them. Their state legislature cannot give them what they don't have. I can't give you Cheryl's car, right? Mm-hmm. Because it's not mine to give, and the legislature can't give these governors that which would be a violation of their oath of office to give. So all of these people need to understand that all of these things are lawless. And one of the efforts that we're trying to make an institute on the Constitution, and we developed a little pamphlet that's a letter to law enforcement officials, because our law enforcement officials don't know what the law is either in many cases.
Mm-hmm.
In many cases, they know something's wrong and they're reluctant to try to enforce these tyrannical edicts and measures, but a lot of times they don't know what the rules are either. So we're trying to do an education outreach, and this is just one thing we did, and we made it kind of an all states version. It says letter to law enforcement officials, and it explains to them what their oath of office requires of them. And let me just read the last sentence, if you don't mind.
Mm-hmm.
It says, your duty requires that you resist such edicts and orders, talking about the unlawful orders of the governors, and that you act in such a manner as to shelter and protect the citizenry from all acts of lawlessness, even and especially when they originate from civil authorities. So there's a provision in the Maryland Constitution that says that the police powers belong to the people. They're not the governor's state police, they're our police.
Mm-hmm.
And all authority arises, and I'm sure this says it's a similar thing in your state and in all states. It says all government of right originates from the people.
Mm-hmm.
The governor can't point to something outside in the ether somewhere that gives him this special authority. It's got to come from the people. And in fact, our constitutions in every state say it doesn't.
They should know that. That's the most embarrassing thing, that if you're a governor of a state, you should know that you got to follow the Constitution. How are they getting away with it?
Because they don't know. Michael was just saying, they don't know what the Constitution says. They're counting on the fact that we don't know, and that we're not going to hold them accountable and responsible. And so we just trip on down the merry lane, and things like, Obamacare gets to sneak its way through. That's a completely unconstitutional situation, because somebody came along and said, well, you know what, it's a tax, so it's okay because it's a tax.
I want to if I want.
Yeah. So they either find a way to phrase it so that it'll slip through the cracks, or they just blatantly do things. They like the ATF, they make a regulation that acts as law without having gone through the process, right?
I'm glad you said that.
A law.
I'm glad you said that. I happened to have the great privilege of speaking to former Chief Justice Roy Moore last week, and as we were talking in the conversation, this idea came up, and I had never thought of this before. And forgive me, because you probably have, but
it's okay.
What we came upon, he used the term, the force is something has the force of law. The force of law.
Force of law, yeah.
If you think about this, to say that something has the force of law is a tacit admission that it's not law.
I have not.
But
I'm going to use that now. So thank you. I'm stealing that.
If it was law, they'd say it's the law. But no, they say that they take an edict, a mandate, a directive, an order, and they say it has the force of law. What they're actually admitting by that phrase is that it's not law. In every state, there is a just as a mini point, but I'm sure this is true in every state. You have a section in your Constitution that says that's what we call a separation of powers clause. It says there's the legislative and a judicial and a executive branch, and somebody charged with executing one branch of government is not allowed to act in another branch. Okay. We use this all the time to say courts cannot make law because lawmaking is in the legislative branch. But we also would say from the other side, executives cannot make law. They're in another branch of government. They can't make law. And the legislature can't give them the right to make law because it's vested. It's vested in the legislature. So you take that phrase, you take that clause, and you take the fact that the governor, in the legislative section of your Constitution, in the executive section, it says that the governor is charged with executing the laws. You take those two together and you go, governors can't make law, right? They just can't. The president can't make law. He's the executive branch. So what are executive orders then? People say, well, what about executive orders? this has been something we've tried to explain to folks. Executive orders only apply to the executive branch. Properly understood, if in my state we're supposed to, they have this directive that they have to wear masks wherever you go, and stand 6 feet apart, and all this conditioning that we're going through. Well, if the governor of my state decided that all state employees in state buildings needed to stand 6 feet apart and wear a mask, he could do that because they work for him, right? See what I'm saying? They work, they're under his authority. But he can't say that to us because we don't work for him. As a matter of fact, he works for us. So don't be fooled by executive orders. Another example we use in the course is, let's say a former governor has passed away last week, and so the current governor says all flags at all state buildings will fly at half-mast in honor of this gentleman that passed away. That because the flag posts and the flags and the people that put the flags up and down the posts, all those work in the executive branch. They work for the governor. He can order that. That's an executive order, and that's valid. But he can't tell you to put your flag at half-mast or anything about your flag or your property because, again, you don't work for him. You're not part of the executive branch. So people need to understand the executive orders. There is such a thing as an executive order, and it does have a valid place. But it can't be used lawfully to quote unquote make law or have the force of law.
So Michael, excuse me, I'm sorry, but we're seeing all over the country that people are starting to stand up against these make-believe laws. They're opening their shops, but they're being arrested. So these people are educated people that say, hey, I know my rights. You can't do this to me. I opened my store, and they turn around and you arrest them or, pull their permits. What can a citizen do?
You can open your store, and you can support others who do open their store. We need to resist, and because the tyranny expands to where it's resisted, and we need to box that tyranny back in and put it away. And I am deeply moved by the acts of heroism that I've seen in people. That lady in Dallas, that her last name is Luther, who had the hair salon. I think it was Salon a la Mode or whatever. She took a stand. Other people across the country are taking stands. There is no, I'd say it this way, there's no lawful authority to close the economy. The economy has never lawfully constitutionally been closed. It's always been open. It's still open now. So we've got to stop obeying tyrants. But Dan, this is an important point, I think. To be able to stand like that and stand up, you need to, first of all, know the law. You got to know your right. You got to be sure. And you got to have some people around you who are sure as well and willing to stand with you. Actually, this is and was the original purpose of the militia, which has been, that would take another show to explain what's happened to the proper understanding of the militia. But this is the job of the militia, and this actually is the job of the county sheriff. I'm a member of the Constitutional Sheriffs and Police Officers Association. I'm sorry, it's Peace Officers Association, headed by Sheriff Richard Mack. And I very much admire the work he does and the work they've done. And there's sheriffs across the country who are standing up and saying, "You can't do this to my people," and I'm gonna defend my people. First of all, a lot of them have said, "We're not going to enforce this," and some have said, "We're going to defend it. We're going to defend these people." There's sheriffs in Michigan that have done that, and across the country. But that's not advertised very well. You're not going to hear that unless you're not going to hear that on CNN, right? Right. But it is true that many people are standing up across the country.
Right, and now we have people to back us up. Where normally it's one thing or another, little things that people didn't hear about. So guy's all alone trying to defend himself. Right now, this thing has grown so big that there are people out there that are listening and hearing and helping.
Well, and the tyrants use the public to police the public.
Oh,
right? They stir up neighbors to snitch on each other. They stir up neighbors to shame one another. And so by extension, the tyrants get what they want because they've instilled enough fear or whatever, so that, it's like a self-policing kind of a scenario.
They've got us snitching on each other. Yeah, they do. And that's dreadful. But again, I think at its heart is the lack of understanding, a lack of knowledge. Before I forget, I'll get yelled at by our boss here, Jake McCauley. I've got to say that please go to Institute on the Constitution, their website, and you can take our course for free. You can take our basic Constitution course for free. We make that available, and thousands of people have done that. I mean, this all began kind of in our law office in Maryland in 1998, and now our materials are used by people all across the country in all 50 states. And now, of course, with the internet and online, it's blossomed, and fast forward, we've had tens of thousands of people that have taken the course, and that's what we need. We need people who, so that they can stand up. They need to know the rules. They need to know what the law is, and they need to be sure of themselves. And they have to have other people surrounding them that will be. And the same goes for law enforcement. That they need support. That's why I really appreciate the work that Sheriff Mack does.
Absolutely, and he's an Arizona guy,
Yeah.
so we love Sheriff Mack. He's been on the show before, and actually, I need to have him back on, like now, to talk about this stuff.
Please tell him I begged you to have him back on. Please.
I will certainly. I'll say that Michael wouldn't even come on until I agreed to bring Sheriff Mack back on.
And
we're good friends.
This program isn't an anti-government program.
No.
This is we support the government, but we want the government to not control us. We want them to govern.
Right. We support what was written in here about government.
Right.
And, this big, huge, thick document, I say this a lot on our show, that the people watching, they can see, it's like this tiny little paper pocket book-sized book. It's like 45 pages long, takes like an hour to read. How many people actually read it? And then you have an entire free course that you're offering to help us understand anything that might be confusing. But let me remind people that at the time that this was written, it was written for the common person, man and woman, to be able to understand for themselves. Somehow over the years, it's been kind of implied or drilled into our heads that, you're too simple, little Jane Doe and John Doe. You're too simple to understand this. So, I am your state representative. I will interpret it for you. Right?
I am your attorney. Right. So, that's right. And actually, you have to go to law school to be able to mess it up that bad.
I agree with you.
You really have to go because, as a matter of fact, again, Chief Justice Roy Moore, law schools don't teach the law anymore. They teach what he calls unlaw. They teach a methodology of understanding the law, which is counter to what the law really is. This is a huge, big problem. It's a huge legal education. It trains up people to believe that the state has all these powers that they don't have.
Mm-hmm.
It's backwards. It's actually you're trained to subvert, pervert, and invert the law rather than to understand it properly. I sat with we by the way, we've lobbied in my state particularly. We've lobbied law schools to teach law what we call the correct way, and they don't want to touch it because it involves biblical understanding and biblical study. But that's what our law is based on.
Mm-hmm.
I found in that document, or in that, not in the Constitution, but in the Declaration, they relied on the laws of nature and nature's God. They were talking about the Bible. They were talking about divine law, because Jefferson was, there he is above my shoulder there. He's always looking over my shoulder, Jefferson. Jefferson was quoting Blackstone. And again, Blackstone said that if man-made law is not in harmony with, if it violates God's law, then it's not law, and we shouldn't call it law. It shouldn't be suffered to exist. So we've, and that happens to be what I believe, but it's not important that I believe it. That's what the documents of our founding are based upon. There's a philosophy of law here. We call it the American view, and that's that there is a God, a creator God. Our rights come from him. And the purpose of civil government is to protect and defend those God-given rights. It's not, by the way, to take care of my health. It's to take care of my liberty so I can take care of my health.
Yes. Yeah. It's the
Right?
pursuit of happiness, right? It's not, here, I'm going to mandate happiness into your life while making a gajillion other people miserable, and you too. But,
Sure.
my goal was to make you happy. So it's all forgiven.
Yeah, we've seen that in other countries and how well that works.
Yeah, exactly.
So Michael, if I were to I want to take that course. So what am I going to go through? How long does it take, and how much work is it?
Well, the way that we offer it under the free, you can purchase the course, and we send the whole thing to you. It involves a workbook that looks. I'll show you the front of it here. It involves a workbook. It involves teachers like the answer key, if you will, supplemental materials. There, yeah. So this is what the course, the basic, the student manual looks like. It's a 12 lecture. We do it over 12 weeks, and if you sign up for the free course, we send you a lesson every week. Mm-hmm. And you are able to mark your progress. There you go. You're able to mark your progress with respect to that. We begin by looking at an American view of law and government. What the American view of government looks like, what it's founded on. That I was just talking about. There's a God. Our rights come from him. And then we compare it to other forms of government. Because all government isn't arranged that way, but there are socialist and Marxist ideas about government, and we compare and contrast those. Then we talk about the philosophical, the religious beliefs of the founders, and how those religious beliefs became philosophical principles that our law is based on, and then we drop that all into a historical context and talk about the period between the Declaration and the Constitution, the American historic experience, and then we actually get into the words, the text of the document itself. But it's important to understand the pretext before you study the text, and then we go through the entire document, the 7 articles of the Constitution, and then the Bill of Rights and the rest of the subsequent amendments, and then we wrap it up by saying, well, we had this biblical view that we were working with. But now we're over here in this secular humanistic view. How did we get there? And we take a whole lesson and talk about the watershed events that kind of got us there. And then we talk about, how do we get back? What are the things that we need to do to get back to this American view of law and government? And as bad as things are now, and they're very, very bad. They're very scary. They're very upsetting. As bad as they are, people now are recognizing what they need to recognize, and they're going back to school. And throughout history, this kind of cycle has repeated itself, where a certain generation or generations fight and achieve a degree of liberty, and then their children get lazy and their grandchildren get lazy, and we lose and give it back. But we have to look at this, that we're living in a time that God put us here for this purpose. And we got to be grateful for that blessing. He didn't put us here in some other time with some other companions. He put us here now, and we have to use the tools he's given us and rely on his divine providence.
Well, amen to
like
all
our founders did.
Right. And they reached a pressure point, and that's what caused the revolution. And, it seems like until we are very uncomfortable, we are not going to change. We're not going to learn. We're not going to grow. We're not going to do something new. And so, there are people out there that are, just like, well, let's have a revolution. Let's have another civil war. First of all, you're soft. We are soft as a society, as a nation. So I don't really see that going well for us. And why don't we work on being proactive rather than waiting for things to get horrible and being reactive? And a way to be proactive is to learn your Constitution, to take these classes. How many hours does it take to go through your course? Like on here, I see the U.S. Constitution course student kit. How long does that take?
Well, like a lot of other things, Cheryl, you can do it in one way, and you can do it in a more deeper way. But again, we give you enough homework to take you through a week, and have you understand the building block of that lesson, and then come with the next lesson. So the way that it's structured that way, it's a 12-week. It's like a semester. It's like a semester of time. And as a matter of fact, homeschools use our course all to a great extent, and that's a big part of our market is homeschool. So, and as a matter of fact, if your children are home from school now, and this is a great thing for you to be doing, because you'll be keeping them busy and having them learn what they were taught, what they were not taught properly. Yes. in government schools anyway, because government schools do not teach American law and government in any way that is truthful or helpful. Well,
what I like to say about this, anything that we're using to homeschool our children, because there's so many of us now. I'm helping homeschool my 5-year-old granddaughter, and yeah, it's a wonderful opportunity. It's hard. It's harder than you think. But what I've been saying to people is, you're teaching your child, wink, but really you're learning so much yourself. But, you can kind of like justify it because, we're supposed to know this stuff. We're adults. I'm just
sure
the kiddo here. But in the process, some of it's going to rub off on us, and that is only a good thing. So, you made a comment earlier about the Constitution is not a self-enforcing document. I'd like to maybe drill a little deeper in on that and help people really, hold on to that. And maybe that's one of the things that they walk away chewing on mentally, like in their brain. Like, what does that really mean? And what responsibility, therefore, does that place on me? If it's not self-enforcing, well, then somebody's got to enforce it. Do I hold up a mirror? Is that me?
That is you. That is you. It's all of us. Because again, the Constitution is not a document that governs us. It's a document that governs and limits those who do govern us. And frequently, you hear this argument if you in Christian circles many times. You hear this Romans 13 argument that we've got to do whatever the civil ruler says, because that's what Romans 13 calls for. And I couldn't disagree more. And let me just give a little. And this goes to our Christian duty to know the Constitution. This is where I'm going with this. Mm-hmm. In America, we don't have rulers. We're self-governed. And in fact, in America, we are the rulers. Mm-hmm. We are the rulers. We have mm-hmm. representatives. Mm-hmm. We vest them with authority by electing them, but we delegate our ruler authority to them, but mm-hmm. we don't lose it. Right. Mm-hmm. We talk about this this is, I'm going to go on a sidebar here. I apologize, but with respect to the Second Amendment, we talk about this all the time. If in order for our police, our law enforcement to be armed, well, we delegate that authority to them to be armed. If we didn't have it, we couldn't delegate it, could we? Mm. So, right. So if I hire Dan to be my bodyguard, and he's working for me as my bodyguard, and I get into a rough place somewhere, and it looks like I'm going to have to punch my way out of this, and then Dan says, "Well, you know what? This is Wednesday, and this is my day off. I'm sorry. I'll see you later. I can't help you. I'm gone." Now, if Dan would never do this.
That's not very nice of you, Dan. But
if Dan did that, let me ask you this question. do I still have the right to try to punch my way out of it if I can?
Yes.
Or because I hired him, do I lose that and I have to take whatever happens?
No.
I mean, of course, it's a principal agency thing. And with respect to the arming of police or militia or army, that's something we delegate to them. Okay, well, why did I say all that? Because the same thing is true with respect to our the powers that we give to our government. We have rights, we give them powers, but those powers are under our authority. We delegate those powers to them. So in America, this idea of just doing whatever the civil government says, and you hear this from some pulpits, which I think is regrettable. I think that's a very unfortunate way to look at things. And there is a Article 6 of our Declaration of Rights in Maryland, which is the first part of our Constitution. You may have a similar article in your state as well. It says, all persons vested with the legislative or executive powers of government are trustees of the public, and as such accountable for their conduct. Wherefore, wherever the ends of government are perverted and public liberty manifestly endangered, and all other means of redress are ineffectual, like we're kind of seeing now, the people may and of right ought to reform the old or establish new government. And then it says this about Romans 13. It doesn't quote Romans 13 exactly, but it says this: the doctrine of non-resistance against arbitrary power and oppression is absurd, slavish, and destructive of the good and happiness of mankind. What our Constitution of Maryland is telling its people is, don't lay down and take violations of this. Mm-hmm. Stand up, because and I believe that this article was actually written because of that Romans 13 argument, because it existed back in 1776 as well. And again, it says the doctrine of non-resistance against arbitrary power and oppression is absurd, slavish, and destructive of the good and happiness of mankind. That's the law of my state. Mm. Right? So, but it's no good if I don't know it.
Right.
It's no good if I don't know it. I have quoted this document. I'm holding up it's a Constitution of Maryland and the Constitution of the United States document. I've used this to testify in my legislature. And I've had, at the end of the session, I've had legislators come out to me and say, where can I get a copy of that you were?
Well, there's this little thing called Google.
And I say, please take mine.
Yes.
I'll get another. Take this one.
For sure. Oh, but man, that's painful.
And they have to have a library.
That is so painful.
Wow.
But at least they asked.
They swore an oath before God to uphold it, and they're asking me where they can get a copy.
So why don't they, before they have somebody swear in, why don't they say, okay, take a couple of weeks to read this and then come swear in? But Michael, I've listened to everything you've said, and it's great news, everything. But I disagree with you on one thing.
Uh-oh, here we go.
Okay, you said we don't have rulers in the United States. We do have rulers. Unfortunately, we have them. They're out of place. We didn't vote them as rulers, but they are rulers. And by learning this law, maybe we can get rid of the rulers and just have politicians in our service.
Absolutely.
Well, I agree. I would just say that their authority to rule is delegated by us.
Yes.
Right.
They don't have any divine right of kings. Their authority to rule comes through us and is under our authority.
So when we have somebody that is a Democrat or a politician that is trying to rule us, then it's our fault because we're not educated enough to know that we can stop them from doing that.
Mm-hmm.
Well, I think we're partly culpable anyway. I mean, again, we're not responsible for what we didn't do, but we are responsible for what we can do and what we should do. And we, the things that I've quoted you about from the Maryland Constitution, everybody in our legislature, and the government, they should all know that and act on it.
Yeah, and I do have to say, I said politicians and Democrats. There are some Republicans that are also trying to be rulers too. So,
yeah. Absolutely.
I didn't mean to just label Democrats.
No, absolutely.
There's politicians out there that they're fully there to control and control only.
For sure. Well, we need to start wrapping up, but I just definitely want to, kind of pinpoint that we have been talking about two majorly important documents, the text of the Bible and our Constitution. And both of those, for too long, for too many generations, we have just allowed others to interpret it for us instead of learning it, reading it for ourselves, so that we have a better contextual understanding of where this, all we maybe memorize is a Romans 13 here, or a John 16 there, or something like that. But if we don't have the context of the whole thing and the time in history when it came about and all of that, then we are going to be so easily duped. How do I know this? Look around you. Here we are in the year 2020. We are so completely duped. And the other thing about both of those documents is how much concerted effort has gone in, especially, I would say, in the last decade or so, maybe even longer, but I'm just more tuned in and tapped in now. Such a concerted effort has gone into attempting to undermine and nullify those documents, and people trying to make it like it's foolishness. And if anybody is quoting it or standing on the principles of those things, that they are foolish as well. And we get scared and we get frozen, and then we don't know what to do, so we do nothing. And then the adversaries, the people that are hoping to take advantage of our frozen state, they move on forward.
Cheryl, one way I think we could help to get us unfrozen is one other document. You mentioned the Bible and the U.S. Constitution. Your state constitution is extremely important, important. And I would urge everybody to everybody, you don't have to read your whole state constitution tonight, but just read which is in most cases Article 1 or the first chapter, which is your Declaration of Rights. That is to say, it's the equivalent of the Bill of Rights in the U.S. Constitution. Every state has one. Familiarize yourself with it. You'll be amazed at what you see that is the law in your state, because you would love to make it the law if it wasn't already, but it's already there. Mm-hmm. It's already there because our founders were wise and learned, and we are blessed with these documents. But again, they're not self-enforcing, right? Mm-hmm. They won't leave, the words won't leap off the page and do the job themselves. We need to understand them, be champions of them. instituteontheconstitution.com, IOTC, instituteontheconstitution.com. And if I could can I give the phone number as well, please?
Yeah, go ahead.
If you call us at 866-730-9, I almost messed it up. 866-730-9796. Again, 866-730-9796. The Institute on the Constitution. You can also find us by going to The American View. That's also will get you to our website. And I'm pleased to be with you. Let me leave you one other thought. The office of governor in our state, and in your state too, the office of governor is a creature of the Constitution. In other words, the Constitution establishes the office of governor. If the governor suspends the Constitution, what does he also suspend?
His own office, right? His own position.
He takes himself out of power when he suspends the Constitution.
Yeah.
Just food for thought.
I love it. Well, I think we've given people lots of things to move forward and chew on and think about. And, I love it. If anybody's out there like, I don't know about that. That doesn't sound right. And they're sort of mentally arguing with us. Bingo. That's awesome. Because now you're thinking, right? And then you've got resources to find answers.
And let me bring this up one more time real quick. This the letter to law enforcement. That's on our website. You can download this, fold it in half. Looks like a church bulletin. You can give it to your pastor. You can put it in the church bulletin, right? Or you can hand it to a law enforcement officer. And it tries to make the case. A lot of us, we all know law enforcement people, right? I mean, your cousin, your uncle, somebody we all know a couple of people that are in law enforcement some way, and we should reach out to them and give them help.
That is awesome. Michael, thank you so much for taking all of this time. And I really want to encourage everybody to go to the website and just buy the materials. Just go ahead and buy them, because then that helps, support this organization that's continuing to teach the next generation. And if you're really, if you're one of the people, the millions of people who unfortunately have been laid off and lost your job, and you really can't, there is a free version. But whichever way you go, just study it. Just empower yourself.
Let's get busy. Let's get busy.
I love it. Michael Peroutka, we thank you so much. We will have you on again.
Thank you very much. Appreciate it, Dan, Cheryl. Thank you very much. God bless you.
God bless you. Fantastic. All right. So now I got to figure out how to pop him out of there. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Wow.
Oh my goodness.
My brain hurts to think about that.
Yes.
There's all these people that are standing for their rights, and then you have the other people that are going, ooh, they just don't care about health of people. They don't care. I'm going to tell on them, but it's so deep. I mean, these people just don't know.
Right.
Makes me very angry.
Well, this gives us an opportunity to go, all right, I didn't know yesterday, but guess what? I now have some tools, and I'm going to know tomorrow. Right. So,
what with this coronavirus thing, real quick.
Mm-hmm.
So we have AZ Firearms and Pot of Gold auctions, and we were open and things were going, and the government says, oh, you're blessed. You can be open because you're a necessity. So we kept the gun shop open. But my family, we decided to close the gun shop.
Mm-hmm.
And the reason we closed the gun shop is because we didn't understand the coronavirus thing. We didn't know if all the information was true, but we didn't want to take a chance and hurt any of our customers or employers.
Right.
Or employees.
Right.
So we decided to close it down. But then after studying and looking at the situation and everything, we decided to reopen. But people, we did that on our own. We made that decision.
Makes all the difference.
I care deeply for the people that work for us and the customers that walk in our door. So what did we do? We evaluated. We took the time to evaluate, prepared for safe operation, and we made that decision.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely.
And we closed the auction house for a month.
2 weeks. It felt like a month.
Oh, yeah.
Oh no, wait, the auction house.
We closed it for about a month.
Yeah, probably.
And we're also operating it in a little different fashion because it's an event that hundreds of people come to.
What is that auction house, Dan?
Pot of Gold Estate liquidations.
Potofgoldestate.com.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
So anyway, we made, but again, I want to make sure everybody understands we made these choices on our own. There are people that have barbershops and clothes stores and beauty supplies, and it's their livelihood. It's what they feed their family with.
Yeah.
And let them make that choice, and you as a consumer can make your choice on how you want to walk into their door.
Right.
If you went into a building that had bad elevators and you knew they had bad elevators, you wouldn't shop there. Right? It's your choice. You make the decision, people.
Right.
That's all I have to say. That's my commentary, I guess.
Commentary. Well, on that note, we need to wrap up today, for today. And man, I just really want our listeners to understand and know how much we value and appreciate you. Your time is your most finite resource. And whether you're watching us video on YouTube or on GunStreamer, or if you're listening on demand on GunFreedomRadio.com, clicking the On Demand tab, we really appreciate you. And while you're at GunFreedomRadio.com, click the Guest tab. That will take you to a bio page with pictures and links and all kinds of wonderful information about every single guest we've ever had on. It is a tremendous resource. And I just thank you so much. And thank you to Michael Peroutka. Holy cow. He's amazing. And the work he's doing is so needed. every day, but especially right now when
Right.
we're all becoming so painfully aware of how much we don't know and how much we're letting our elected officials get away with. And speaking of them, we gotta pray for them. We gotta pray for our nation, and we've got to pray for those elected officials.
All of them?
All of them.
Well, how about
Yes,
we all
all of
pray?
them.
How about we all pray that they get a subscription to this class? How about that?
Send them a link to the free classes. That would be awesome.
They can be healed.
Maybe flood their email,
Yes.
their inboxes with links to, okay, hint, to better represent me.
Right.
I will also be learning, and maybe you can learn about this thing that you swore an oath to protect and defend, the
Yes.
Constitution.
Send them to their aides too, because they make a lot of the decisions for
True
politicians.
story.
But anyway, so we'll pray for they all to get a kit.
All of them, Dan, even
All
the ones that you don't like, and
well,
especially the ones that you don't like. I'm a little fired up right now, so I'm finding it a little harder. But we need to. But be good to each other. Have a great week, and God bless.
Bye.